Hey guys, welcome back to Transmit to 1075. Over the last 2 weeks, I posted two, contentious type videos, or at least for some, I wouldn't say they were contentious. But anyway, one of them was women's fire testing. You should go check that out. I'll include that at the end of this video. And the other one was discussing whether or not bailout devices actually save lives in the fire service. I actually thought that video would do a little better than it has, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. I think it has some valid points, but for whatever reason, I guess guys just want to watch fires. Today, I want to bring up another topic since I'm on a roll, and that is 5-inch hose. I'm here to tell you that 5-inch hose is a waste of money and a waste of time. 99.99 times. And I'm going to go through a bunch of reasons why I think so. But again, as I always try to say on this site, I don't know everything. I have been around. I've seen a lot of things, so I think I have a good perspective of the world. But for some reason, you see the world a different way. By all means, put it in the comments. Tell me how I'm wrong. So let me just start here. There's a lot to go over. So first off, as I've said here before, I'm going to go over my opinion on the topic. So as I said here 10 times, I've been in the fire service for about 32 years. Some of that was volunteer, some of that was career, a couple different career departments. I worked city EMS, so have 3 generations of firefighters in my family. So I've seen a bunch of things, been a bunch of places. I think I have a pretty good perspective. My anecdotal experience of the fire service on all the fires that I went to, and I was in New Jersey, and we were fighting fires in the 80s and the 90s, which I think is generally busier than it is now. And I'm sure we could go back another 10, 20, a couple decades back. And it, as we all know, the amount of fires is going down. But I got a few fires under my belt. And even at the time I was a volunteer, I lived next to the firehouse. And so for about 10 years, maybe 12 years, I didn't miss the first due engine for 365 days a year. Some people would say you're a loser. I thought this was the greatest thing ever, and I knew that I wanted to do this for my life. So all joking aside, it was a great experience for me. But anyway, that engine didn't go out the door without me on it for 10 years. So again, I have some experience. And what I'll tell you in that experience, and I was in suburbia, okay, I never went to a fire that either, first of all, 99% of every fire I ever went to, commercial or residential, we could put out with tank water.
Incident commander, I make sure that the companies going into the building know that there's no positive water source.
And it's 3:30 to chauffeur. We're gonna need water when you can.
And I'm also listening for the chauffeur to notify his boss that he's gonna drop the booster, which is 500 gallons that the engine's carrying. So we always have 500 gallons in reserve, and that's what it's there for, emergencies like that. Most fires will go out with 500 gallons. Most fires will go out with 500 gallons. Most fires will go out with 500 gallons. Most fires will go out with 500 gallons.
At starters, at the beginning of this conversation, we can say that we're talking about 3%, 2% of fires that can't be controlled by the first due engine or maybe even being supplied by the second due engine. And it also depends on where you're from, right? New York City has a 500-gallon tank. You could be in rural communities that have 2,000 gallons of water on the first due engine. So that's my first thing I wanted to say, is that almost every fire I ever went to in 32 years, we practically knocked the thing down with tank water. We were a 5-inch hose everywhere I worked or everywhere I volunteered. We were big into 5-inch hose. And I can tell you, anytime that 5-inch was put on the ground and it was charging the apparatus that we were using, I don't recall ever witnessing it being the engine that was supplying the water was at idle. Right, so we had so much water at these scenes that, yes, we had 5-inch hose, but it was not necessary because it was being supplied at idle pressure. Okay, so that's the one thing I want to say. I will say, one time in my entire career, volunteer or paid, I did go to a fire that we needed 5-inch hose, and that it was well worth it. And let me show you.
3 million gallons of gasoline go up in flames. Good evening. Firefighters struggle to avoid catastrophe.
The burning tank is right in the middle of a cluster of tanks, 17 of them in all of them filled with fuel. And tonight, police ordered hundreds of people living near the refinery to get out of their homes. They're afraid the adjacent tanks might explode because of the fire's intense heat. The fire is burning inside the Shell Oil refinery near the New Jersey Turnpike in Woodbridge. And right now, News Channel 4's Joe Avadar is on the scene with the latest. Joe?
Well, they're absolutely worried that it could explode, and you can get an idea just how big this fire is over my shoulder. I'm about a quarter-mile away from where this fire is, and I can actually feel the heat. I'm not exaggerating. I can feel the heat of this thing from where I'm standing. Now, to give you an idea of what firefighters are worried about, let's go up to Chopper 4 right now and give you an idea. Now, the tank that's burning right now is in the center of 4 other tanks, and they're worried that this fire could spread to those other tanks. So what they're doing is they've got firefighters up, and they're spraying water on those other tanks, trying to keep them cool, trying to prevent them from exploding. In the meantime, Shell Oil Company, which owns this tank farm, has experts coming in from Houston to try to advise on how to put this thing out. Right now, they expect this thing is going to burn at least until tomorrow. Fireballs burst into the air all evening. Water pressures become a problem. The hydrants can't handle it. Firefighters are now taking water from the Arthur Kill to pump on the surrounding gasoline tanks to keep them from exploding. One's been singed. The tank fire that refused to die was finally out. It had raged all day, defying 4 attempts to smother it with foam. Burning was 70,000 barrels of gasoline. That's 3 million gallons of gasoline. It was ignited by a lightning bolt Tuesday at 4:15 in the afternoon, and it just burned. Governor Christie Todd Whitman came to view the scene. 300 firefighters from surrounding towns worked in shifts night and day, spraying water on the surrounding oil storage tanks in the Shell Oil tank farm to keep them from catching fire. They got their water from these fire trucks driven directly into the Arthur Kill and pumping 1,000 gallons per minute.
All right, so this is the engine that I drove to this incident. This is engine 435. I drove this about, I'd say, almost 30 miles to this incident. I remember going up the New Jersey Turnpike and seeing this just massive column of black smoke. Actually sort of reminded me, I had done the same thing years later for 9/11. Very different. The term, first of all, didn't do anything at 9/11, so I won't even pretend to take credit there. But both of those incidents were rather different going up the New Jersey Turnpike. 9/11, the turnpike was completely shut down, not a car on it. All the state troopers had it all shut off. And so we just shot up the road with no one there seeing this column. But in this case, we were driving up the turnpike, cars everywhere. This rig only did like 68 miles an hour, so people were passing us, but everyone under the sun knew where we were going because you could just see this big column. We got there, went to a staging area. They decided they wanted us to be part of this relay to supply. Supposedly, they had a 2,000 gallon per minute nozzle or deck gun or some type of master stream. We came down to the Arthur Kill. At the time this incident, we were not this deep in the water. We were the tide was down further. We had a front suction and a side suction. We knocked down. My goodness, we were going through people's backyards, knocking down fences, hand dragging 5-inch hose to get to this, get to the incident. Started supplying this master stream. At some point, officials from Shell came to us because the tide was coming up. This is salt water, and you know some other companies were a little concerned about leaving their rigs in the water for obvious reasons because of the salt and whatever. Shell Oil basically said to me, please just let this thing keep going. It's a asset that we think is really making a difference, and shutting it off would be risky to the other tanks going. And they basically said they would pay for any damage whatsoever, which they did. They bought us new walkie-talkies and replaced the wheels and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, my point to bringing this whole thing up is that I flowed. This is not me. This is someone who replaced me I probably pumped this rig for, I would say 20 hours straight at 2,000 gallons per minute, something like that. I would say that, you do the math, it's like 2,000 gallons times 60 minutes times 20-something hours. It's in the ballpark of 2.5 million gallons of water I pumped. which is actually still less than the amount of gasoline in that tanker, in one of these tankers. I remember sleeping up here at one point at like 4 in the morning. I was exhausted, and I remember seeing flames coming over these treetops that had to be 50 to 100 feet over the treetops. It was insane. Anyway, my point to this whole thing is that, you know, Shell Oil and these other refineries, they have 5-inch or 6-inch hose, and they have these big master streams and so forth, because this is a scenario, this is the 1 in a million scenario where this actually sort of makes sense. You have 3 million gallons of of gasoline here and 3 million there, and you want to cool things, and you want a really far distance to shoot the water, and blah blah blah. This is what 5-inch hose is for, guys, not for fighting house fires. Okay, so this is my one anecdotal situation. 32 years. This is the one time where I saw 5-inch hose. And by the way, we were pumping this rig. I cannot believe that this rig didn't blow up. I had this thing screaming for 20 hours straight. Okay, let's move on. This is the movie. I shouldn't say it's a movie, a documentary. The Bronx is Burning. If you've never watched this, I would say you're doing yourself a disservice. It's a really cool. If you're a firefighter and you love the job, at some point in your life, you got to watch The Bronx is Burning. This is when men were men. This is when the war years. This is when firemen went to fires. Half these guys don't even have air packs. These guys were doing it on a daily basis. And so I've watched many of these. I'm a huge FDNY buff. I think New York City is the greatest department of all time ever. Like I said, check this out.
Sometimes parts of New York look more like a B-feature film set than somewhere for people to live, like the South Bronx, a backdrop to incessant drama for the firemen of Ladder 31 and Engine 82. The fire statistics for New York are staggering. New York has more fires than Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia put together. The New York Fire Department responds to nearly 250,000 calls a year, 3 times as many as the London Fire Brigade. And the busiest district is the South Bronx, where last year the men from Battalion 27 responded to more than 10,000 calls. On average, that's one every 45 minutes, night and day, every day of the year. Few would challenge their claim to be the busiest fire station in the world. Most of the fires they fight are in abandoned buildings. Many of them are started deliberately. All are dangerous.
All right, so one thing I also wanted to add, Dennis Smith, report from Engine Company 82, has to be a prerequisite. If you're a firefighter anywhere in the country, do yourself a favor and read that book. I think it's one of the greatest books of all time. But anyway, the reason why I'm bringing up these salty dogs is that I've watched all these vintage shows, movies, documentaries, and please, like I said, check them out. But I have to say, in all the time I've watched all of them, I never heard it mentioned that when the entire city was burning down, right? New York City has the most multiple dwellings, the most single-family residences, exposures. I never heard word mention that if they'd only had bigger supply line hoses, that the city wouldn't have burned down or they would have been safer. Somehow, these guys were going to 20 times, 30 times as amount of fires as we have ever done. Seem to be able to put these fires out with, 3.5-inch, 2.5-inch, 3-inch hose. There's a reason for that, guys, because it's more than adequate. All right, wait a second, Mr. Transmit the 1075 YouTube channel. Those days, the war years, the Bronx is burning. Those were different times. These days, the fire load hydrocarbons in couches and plastics is far worse. It's not the same thing. Well, okay, let's look and see what the greatest department, the busiest department, the department with the most skyscrapers and multiple dwellings and stadiums and go on, and we can go on and on and on, right? Single family dwellings. What's the busiest department in the country doing? Let's find out. Let's go down here. This is Engine Company Operations 2021, an apparatus overview. Okay, let's go down here and find out. There's a 2,000 gallons per minute pump. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. Let's go down further. The booster tank, 500-gallon tank. That hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, if you're in suburbia, if you're in the country, everyone has vastly more. This is the lowest amount of gallons in a tank that you're going to see, right? So they're still managing, but you guys have more. That's more power to you. I think that's a great idea. Okay, let's go down. We got outlets, hose drains, bleeders. Let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Oh, the deck gun. I have 4 videos so far. I'll probably do some more because you can always enjoy a good deck gun video, but there it is, the straight bore. Best way to utilize a deck gun. Hose bed. Let's look at this, the supply hose. In 2021, what are they suggesting? One bed must contain 3.5-inch hose. Guys, the busiest department in the United States is using 3.5-inch supply hose. If they can do it, okay, if they have the most exposures, again, the biggest buildings, warehouses, old buildings, right? They have the worst scenario of just about anyone in the country. If they can manage on a day-to-day basis with a 3.5 hose, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you can too. Okay, so there's that. Let's keep going. Oh, and let's do one more thing here. Look, hydrant connections, right? They recommend, right, even their hydrant connection, they'll have I guess they'll call it a soft sleeve. But again, they'll use 3.5 soft sleeve. And sometimes, again, and I'm not even opposed to this, you want a yellow 5-inch pony length to throw to a hydrant. I'm not against that, okay? Throw it up in the front. It's no problem. But here again, what is the greatest department in the world using? 3.5. Okay, so why am I bitching and complaining about 5-inch so hard? So I don't see, if you start going through the pros and cons of 5-inch hose, yes, it has this 1 in a million advantage of flowing more water if you're at some crazy scenario like an oil refinery. I would also argue that in many times as fires get bigger and bigger and bigger, this idea of having more and more water, right? Big fire, big water. Yes, I think that's true. However, I would argue that as the fire continues to get bigger, it's not necessarily in the area where you're working, right? So if the first 2 engine pulls up at a commercial building and this fire turns into some monstrosity, I don't need all the water right in front of me. I need it down the corner. I need it on the opposite side. And so I would say 2 things. One, all that water gallon per minute is not needed exactly in the location of one piece of equipment. But I'd also would say it's like a stock portfolio. And that's what I mean by saying that is that you don't want all your eggs in one basket, right? You want to minimize risk. So I don't want all the water supply, I would argue, having it come to one piece of equipment puts you in a liability risk, because if you have a problem with that supply hose, if you have a problem with that apparatus, or the apparatus goes down, or whatever the problem is, now all your eggs are in one basket, and you're no longer operating at the fire. But the bigger thing is the cons to me are big. First of all, the hose is just expensive, okay? So you could spend half the money and get hose that's easier to work with, right? So these are the pros. It's heavy. You need more manpower. It weighs down the rig. It takes up space. So you have these bastardized hose beds. If you look at half the engine companies in the country, they have so much 5-inch hose taking up the back of their engine that they can't do adequate and well thought out hose lays for actually fighting fires. You have these hose lays in the back for this idea that you're going to drop 1,000 feet or do whatever. Meanwhile, your day-to-day firefighting is limited because you don't have the hose packs laid out in the proper way. I have found that 3-inch, obviously I would go with the 3.5 FDNY. I'd even maybe concede on 4-inch hose, although I still think that's overkill. But something where, especially in the day and times that we live in. Look, FDNY can practically put fires out with just bodies, okay? But most companies in this country don't have that luxury. So you have 3-man engine companies at times. I mean, I've heard of 2, but that's even more ridiculous. But a 3-man engine company, it's nice for the chauffeur to be able to stretch, and I've done it multiple times, okay, against the I hate to say it, sort of SOPs or the common practices. As the chauffeur, I multiple times pulled a 3-inch line, and it's again, one guy can do it. I can stretch further. You get a couple lengths of 5-inch, as you see this picture of this guy here. Once you get a length on the ground, forget it. You're not pulling it much further. And so a 3-inch line, think about this. You stretch the first line, you get it in service. Let's say you have 500 gallons and you have a limited tank, a limited booster tank. If a chauffeur can stretch by himself to a hydrant, a 3-inch line, and get a water supply started, he can actually get water, continue water without losing it. Whereas if you're using 5-inch, you may have to wait for the next company in because you can't manage it, or if you're doing it by yourself, you're leaving the rig. Anyway, there's no need for this. My feeling about this whole thing is this is a sales. It's always been for the last 20 years. It's a sales marketing BS thing where we've convinced firefighter it's the latest and greatest, and when you had 3-inch or you had 4-inch that wasn't good enough, it's in 5 more years they'll be trying to sell you 6-inch hose. It's not needed, it's not required, and it makes you do your job less effectively. It doesn't make the world a better place. It's not putting out fires. It's a joke. Okay? And look, so I'm sure guys out here are going to tell me, what are you talking about? They have Maxi Water in New York City, and you know what? Okay. You have some department located in some location, or if you're a big city department, you want to have a couple engines like New York City does that have this ability, fine. You want to have a company that is by a refinery or by some situation where you think 5-inch hose would work out better, I'm fine with that. But for the day-to-day operations, it's a waste of time. I'm going to classify this or put this in the same bucket as, and I'm going to insult a few of my buddies or people that I know, but you have these guys in the fire service who are screwing around with fire hydrants trying to figure out how many hoses they can hook to one fire hydrant to get as much GPM out of it. I can tell you right now that if you're worrying about 5-inch hose and you're worrying about how many lines you can hook to a hydrant, your department doesn't see enough fire. Because if you did, you wouldn't be worrying about goofy things like this. It's not helping. It's not putting out fires faster. These are people and again, I'm from these departments, okay? I'm not from a big, busy department. I'm from a department that didn't see enough fire. But there are some individuals who are trying to reinvent the wheel, and I think this is a little bit of that, and it's a little bit of salesmanship, and it's not required. There will be the mathematicians of the fire service who will be like, well, wait a second, I have 2 lines at 250 gallons per minute and blah, 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 and that hose only supplies. Yes, I understand that sometimes it would appear that the math doesn't make sense on paper. But in 2 things I want to say. One is a lot of times these lines aren't being operated continuously. So this idea that you're running 2.5s or 1 3/4 or whatever the case is continuously, in most cases it's not the case. So they're being shut down and moved or turned on for 10 seconds and whatever. So the gallons per minute from the supply line can catch up and maintain water supply because, as I'm saying, they're not being run all the time. Maybe it's just me, but at 4 in the morning, when you're exhausted and wet and it's cold and there's 6 miles of 5-inch hose on the ground, it's just not something I want to be doing. And I don't think most guys want to, particularly when there's no value in dropping this monstrosity on the ground. I'd much rather have a 3-inch, 3.5, something that a couple guys can pick up quickly and go back to quarters and clean up and get the rigs back in service. The other thing, the not spoken discussion, or what we need to concede the point at some point is that, let's face it, most fires, you get there and you have a short period of time to change the trajectory of the fire. And most times, particularly if you have guys that know what they're doing, are competent, are aggressive, get in there and put the fire out. But at some point, if you've lost that case, you've lost the cause, and now it's spreading to the entire building or the entire barn or whatever it is, and you're going into defensive operations, it tends to become a dog and pony show, and that you're not really changing anything. We're just raising the ladders so that the helicopters and neighbors can see, and so they know what town you're from. And we're not doing anything. You're just making it look good. So the porta-pons and the 5-inch hose and hitting a hydrant 6 different ways with 6 different lines at the same time isn't changing anything. A friend of mine, we always used to laugh, and the saying would be, if you never showed up, would the outcome be any different? And I think it's a valid one, right? Because if you never showed up and the building burned to the ground, did the fact that you laid 6 5-inch lines and set up a porta pond and brought 35 companies in really make any difference? No. We probably could have called in a half of them or a third of them, maybe let the place burn down and gone home a little faster. But anyway, this video is long enough. I hope it's going to inspire some conversation here. Please let me know what you think. I'm sure I'll get some pushback here, and that's perfectly fine too. Please be sure to look at the other videos I've already made here. I've been compiling a bunch of them, and I'm enjoying the fact that guys are starting to subscribe more and more. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next one.